My in-laws said I didn't fit their standard, then a billionaire walked in and everything went silent. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. The first dinner at Daniel's family house was nothing like I expected. I had imagined warmth, laughter, and polite conversation, but what I got was a subtle, constant judgment. His mother, Margaret, kept commenting on my choice of dress, calling it simple, while his father, Richard, made little remarks about my job, asking if I was sure I wanted to do something so modest. Even Daniel's friends seemed to notice every small mistake I made, exchanging quiet smirks that made my stomach churn. I tried to keep a smile on my face, nodding politely, but inside I felt every word like a sting. I reminded myself that this was just a dinner, that these were people who had never known me. Still, it was hard not to let the embarrassment show. Every comment chipped away at my confidence, and Daniel, instead of standing up for me, just looked uncomfortable and kept changing the topic. I wondered if he even realized how much his family's words were hurting me. At one point, Margaret leaned closer and said in a whisper meant to be playful but dripping with condescension, "Hannah, you really don't have the same background as us. Are you sure you're ready for this?" I forced a laugh, my cheeks burning, but her words stayed with me. I felt small, unworthy, and out of place in a house that should have felt like family. Daniel's silence felt heavier than the insults themselves, and I started questioning whether love was enough when respect was missing. Then, just when I thought the night couldn't get more tense, the door opened. Everyone paused mid-conversation. A tall man walked in, confidently and effortlessly commanding attention without saying a word. He smiled politely, greeting Daniel's parents, and introduced himself as Lucas Kane. There was something in the way he carried himself that made the room go still, like time had paused for a moment. People stopped talking, forks hovered in midair, and for the first time that evening, I felt a spark of hope, not for their approval, but for a moment of validation that wasn't dependent on anyone else's judgment. I couldn't take my eyes off him. He didn't seem impressed by status or wealth, yet his presence carried a sense of authority and respect that was undeniable. Margaret's usual smirk faded, replaced by an awkward, tight-lipped smile. Richard seemed momentarily lost for words, and Daniel's friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For the first time, the power in the room shifted, and I realized that this mysterious guest might change everything. I sat back in my chair, trying to calm the rapid beating of my heart. I didn't know what Lucas Kane's presence would bring, but for the first time all night, I felt like I wasn't invisible. And in that moment, I understood that sometimes, life has a way of turning humiliation into opportunity, but only if you stay patient and true to yourself. Hannah spent the next few weeks trying to adjust to Daniel's family. She wanted to show them she could fit in, that she could be someone they respected and valued. She carefully chose her outfits, learned about their interests, and made an effort to engage in conversations. Yet, no matter what she did, it never seemed enough. Every compliment she received was followed by a remark that made her feel small, every achievement she shared was downplayed, and her attempts to connect were met with subtle disapproval. Daniel watched most of it silently. He never interrupted his parents or defended her when their comments crossed the line. At first, Hannah thought he might just be uncomfortable, unsure of what to say, but gradually she realized that his passivity wasn't accidental. One evening, she overheard him on the phone with his mother, explaining why she was difficult to understand and promising to handle it. The words stung more than any insult from his parents. He wasn't just silent, he was choosing them over her, prioritizing their opinions over her feelings. Hannah felt a deep ache in her chest. The man she loved, the one she thought would protect her heart, was letting her stand alone against ridicule. The betrayal cut deeper than the comments from his family. It wasn't just the disrespect from strangers, it was the realization that someone she trusted completely had failed her when it mattered most. She had given him her heart, her loyalty, and yet he seemed willing to sacrifice it to maintain the approval of others. The sense of betrayal grew each day. Hannah started noticing little things, Daniel avoiding her eyes when she spoke up, brushing off her concerns with a casual, "They didn't mean it that way," and making excuses for why he couldn't support her in front of his family. She began to feel invisible in her own relationship, her voice unheard, her feelings dismissed. The love she thought was mutual suddenly seemed one-sided, and it left her questioning everything she had believed about him and their future together. But amidst the hurt, a spark of determination ignited within her. Hannah realized that no one could define her worth, not his family, not Daniel, and certainly not the judgmental world around her. She promised herself that she would rise above their humiliation, that she would not allow their narrow-minded standards to dictate her life. She would find strength in her own abilities, prove her value quietly yet powerfully, and reclaim the respect she deserved. With that resolve, Hannah's focus shifted from pleasing others to preparing for the moment she could show them all who she really was. The humiliation she had endured became fuel, driving her toward a future where she would not only survive but thrive. And in the quiet of her heart, she knew that the time for her true victory was coming. Hannah realized that arguing with Daniel's family or confronting them directly would achieve nothing. Their pride and judgment were too deep-rooted, and any confrontation would only give them more reason to dismiss her. Instead, she decided to focus on herself, to let her actions speak louder than their words. She began planning small, subtle ways to assert her presence and prove her worth, without giving them a single opportunity to belittle her openly. At work, Hannah threw herself into her projects with quiet determination. She stayed late, researched thoroughly, and came up with ideas that impressed her colleagues and managers. Her contributions began to stand out, and soon she was recognized for her talent and professionalism. Every success, though not broadcasted to her in-laws, added to her confidence and sense of accomplishment. She no longer measured herself by their judgment but by her own growth and achievements. Meanwhile, Daniel's family remained unaware of her rising success. They continued their subtle remarks and dismissive behavior, assuming she was the same unsure, timid woman they had met at the first dinner. Their inability to see her progress only strengthened Hannah's resolve. She smiled politely, nodded at their comments, but never allowed their opinions to shake her inner strength. Every insult and underestimation became fuel for her quiet ambition. Hannah's close friends noticed the change in her. They saw how she carried herself differently, the confidence in her voice, the calm in her demeanor, and the quiet pride in her accomplishments. Without making a show of it, they supported her, offering encouragement, advice, and reassurance that she was on the right path. Their belief in her made her more determined to keep moving forward, not for anyone else, but for herself. With every small victory and every ignored insult, Hannah planted the seeds of her subtle revenge. She understood that patience would be her greatest weapon. She didn't need dramatic confrontations or public arguments. The hypocrisy and arrogance of Daniel's family would eventually be revealed through her success. Her quiet determination was slowly creating a future where the power dynamic would shift, where she would no longer be the one on the receiving end of judgment and disrespect. Hannah felt a growing sense of control over her own life. She no longer waited for validation from anyone else, knowing that her worth was her own to define. The more she focused on herself and her achievements, the clearer it became that the humiliation she had endured was temporary. She was building something far stronger, a life where respect, recognition, and dignity were hers by right. And in the back of her mind, she knew that when the time came, those who had once dismissed her would finally understand exactly who she had become. Hannah received an invitation to a high-profile charity gala. This time, she decided to attend on her own, not as Daniel's guest, but representing her own achievements and work. She spent days preparing, choosing a dress that was elegant yet simple, reflecting the confidence she had been quietly building. For the first time in a long while, she felt she was stepping into a space on her own terms, not trying to fit someone else's standards. At the event, she moved through the crowd with calm confidence. People noticed her poise, but she didn't seek attention. Her focus was on the cause, on the conversations she could have, and on the opportunity to meet individuals who shared her passion and vision. She found herself speaking with various influential people, sharing her ideas and receiving genuine interest and respect in return. For once, she didn't feel judged or belittled, she felt seen. Then she met Lucas Kane. He approached her with a polite smile and introduced himself. What struck Hannah immediately was the way he listened, truly listened, without judgment or expectation. He asked questions about her work, her ambitions, and her perspective on the charity's mission. Hannah was surprised by how much he appreciated her intelligence and confidence, treating her as an equal rather than someone to be measured against societal standards. There was a spark in their conversation, a recognition of each other's value that Hannah hadn't experienced with Daniel or his family. As they talked, Hannah noticed her in-laws across the room. They were busy mingling with their circle, unaware that she was holding the attention of a man with immense influence. She felt a quiet sense of vindication but didn't let it show. She maintained her composure, smiling politely at her surroundings, fully aware of the contrast between their assumptions and the reality unfolding. The thought that they could not grasp her presence in a room where she was respected and admired filled her with a quiet satisfaction. Throughout the evening, Hannah continued to engage with others, but she kept returning to her conversation with Lucas. He encouraged her to think bigger, asked her about her future plans, and offered advice in a way that was supportive, not condescending. The connection was subtle yet impactful, leaving Hannah feeling both energized and recognized for who she truly was. By the end of the night, Hannah understood something important: her value did not depend on Daniel's family or anyone who had belittled her. It was defined by her actions, her confidence, and the respect she earned from people who truly mattered. For the first time, she felt a deep sense of empowerment and clarity. She had stepped into her own light, and the world had taken notice. And though her in-laws remained unaware, she knew that her quiet rise had begun, and nothing could stop the momentum she had built for herself. The following week, Hannah attended a public gathering for a charitable cause, representing her own work. The room was filled with influential people, local leaders, and prominent philanthropists. She moved with quiet confidence, knowing her efforts and accomplishments spoke for themselves. She didn't need to announce her presence, her work had already begun to create a reputation. Lucas Kane, who had been mentoring and supporting her quietly, stood beside her during a discussion about new initiatives. When he addressed the group, he didn't just speak politely, he praised Hannah openly. He highlighted her intelligence, dedication, and creativity, crediting her ideas for inspiring several successful projects. Hannah Porter has shown not only remarkable skill but also integrity and vision, he said. His words carried weight, and everyone in the room listened. Daniel's family was there as well, and the moment Lucas spoke, their expressions changed. Margaret and Richard's usual smugness vanished, replaced by shock and disbelief. They had assumed Hannah was insignificant, someone who would never stand out beyond their narrow expectations. Now, hearing her work celebrated so publicly and by someone of Lucas's influence, their confidence faltered. Their whispered comments, nervous glances, and awkward movements betrayed how unprepared they were for this reality. Daniel, standing nearby, felt panic rise. He realized he had underestimated Hannah all along. Every dismissive remark he had ignored, every time he had failed to defend her, now seemed like a mistake. He watched as people genuinely admired her, their attention focused on her achievements and character. For the first time, he understood that the woman he had overlooked possessed strength and brilliance far beyond what he had imagined. Hannah, aware of the tension, didn't gloat or make a show of her success. She maintained grace, smiling softly, engaging politely with others, and allowing Lucas's praise to naturally elevate her presence. She didn't need to say a word to make her point, the acknowledgement of her work and character spoke louder than anything she could have said herself. The contrast was clear. Daniel's family had tried to define her by their standards, yet here she was, recognized and admired by people who truly mattered. Their attempts to belittle her had backfired, highlighting their own arrogance rather than diminishing her. In that moment, Hannah felt a surge of quiet triumph. She realized that her patience, persistence, and self-belief had brought her to this point. The gathering continued, but the memory of Lucas's words lingered. Hannah understood that this was not just recognition, it was a turning point. She had proven her worth in a space where judgment and status mattered, not for show but through genuine achievement. And as she moved through the crowd, engaging with others, she carried herself with the knowledge that she had already won, leaving the in-laws' shock and Daniel's panic as a silent testament to her rise. Later that evening, Daniel asked Hannah to speak with him privately. His tone was tense, and there was a mix of frustration and fear in his eyes. It was clear he felt unsettled by the attention she had received at the gathering. He wanted to regain control, to remind her, or perhaps himself, of the dynamic he thought existed between them. Hannah listened quietly as he spoke, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to his agitation. When he tried to blame the situation on luck or exaggerate her successes, she didn't interrupt. Instead, she waited for him to finish and then spoke, her voice steady and measured. She calmly recounted the countless times he had stood by while his family belittled her, the times he had chosen their approval over defending her feelings, and the many moments she had felt unseen and unsupported in their relationship. Her words hit with clarity. She didn't shout or accuse, she simply stated the truth. She described specific incidents, the comments at the first family dinner, the whispered criticisms during gatherings, and the way he had avoided confronting his parents' judgment. Every detail she shared was factual, yet carried the weight of emotional betrayal. She made him see, without exaggeration, how his silence had allowed her to be hurt repeatedly, and how his passivity had prioritized his family's comfort over her dignity. Daniel tried to interrupt, to twist her words and shift blame back onto her, but Hannah's composure never wavered. She didn't give him the opportunity to manipulate the conversation. Her intelligence and measured approach left no room for his excuses. Each time he stumbled for a response, she met it with calm reasoning, making him realize that his attempts to control or confuse her were futile. As the conversation progressed, Daniel's confidence eroded. He began to understand, perhaps for the first time, the depth of his own failures. He saw the consequences of his passivity and the impact it had on their relationship. Hannah didn't need to declare victory or gloat, her quiet strength and clarity were more powerful than any confrontation he could have imagined. When the discussion ended, Hannah walked away with her head held high, leaving Daniel standing in silence. He was left questioning his choices, his loyalty, and his judgment, not just toward her, but toward his family and himself. Hannah's subtle revenge had begun, not through vindictive actions, but by exposing the truth with composure and dignity. She had shifted the power dynamic, reclaiming her voice and leaving him to face the reality of what he had failed to protect. In that moment, Hannah realized that her greatest strength lay not in retaliation, but in her ability to stand firm, speak honestly, and let her actions and character define her. Daniel's regret, confusion, and inability to manipulate her marked the beginning of her emotional victory, one that would continue to grow with every step she took forward. Over the next few months, Hannah focused entirely on her personal and professional growth. She took on new projects at work, led initiatives that impressed her colleagues, and consistently delivered results that couldn't be ignored. Her reputation grew steadily, not through boasting, but through the tangible impact of her work. Every success reinforced her confidence and reminded her that she didn't need anyone's approval to prove her worth. Lucas continued to support her, though always subtly. He mentioned her contributions in conversations with influential people, recommended her for opportunities, and gave her advice that helped her navigate challenges with ease. His encouragement wasn't about overshadowing anyone, it was about ensuring that her achievements received the recognition they deserved. Through his support, Hannah began to see doors open that she hadn't imagined possible, further solidifying her sense of independence and accomplishment. Meanwhile, Daniel and his family watched from the sidelines, growing increasingly uneasy. They attempted to insert themselves into Hannah's growing circle, offering invitations, compliments, and empty gestures of friendship, hoping to regain influence over her life. But it was too late. Hannah's successes spoke for themselves, and their attempts felt forced and transparent. Their arrogance and past dismissals were no longer hidden, they became obvious to everyone around them, further highlighting the contrast between her quiet rise and their failed attempts to control the narrative. Hannah didn't need to confront them or call out their behavior. Her life had changed quietly but powerfully. The promotions, recognitions, and respect she earned were far more effective than any argument or insult could ever have been. Each acknowledgement she received from colleagues and influential figures reminded her that her value wasn't determined by Daniel or his family, and that she had already achieved a level of success they couldn't diminish. The more she thrived, the more Daniel's insecurities surfaced. He had underestimated her, ignored her worth, and failed to support her when it mattered. Watching her grow independently made him question his choices and his judgment, though he couldn't undo what had already happened. The tension in the room whenever their paths crossed was palpable, a silent acknowledgement of the shift in power that Hannah had achieved without raising her voice. Hannah, however, remained composed and focused. She celebrated her victories quietly, enjoying the respect and admiration she earned naturally. She had discovered that true triumph didn't require drama or confrontation, it came from consistent effort, integrity, and the courage to rise above humiliation. As her influence grew and her achievements became more visible, everyone around her, including Daniel and his family, had to reckon with the reality that Hannah Porter was no longer the woman they had underestimated. Her quiet triumph was complete, leaving them to face the consequences of their arrogance while she continued to move forward, stronger and more confident than ever. Hannah was invited to a prestigious business event to speak about a project she had led successfully. This time, she wasn't just representing herself, she was showcasing her leadership, vision, and the results of months of hard work. The room was filled with influential figures, media representatives, and top leaders from her industry. Every detail of her presentation reflected the confidence and expertise she had developed over the past months. As she spoke, it became clear that people were impressed. Her ideas were praised, questions were asked, and her ability to handle challenges with clarity and intelligence drew genuine admiration. Reporters took notes, and industry leaders exchanged approving glances. The recognition she had earned quietly over time was now visible to everyone in the room. Daniel's family was also present, attending out of obligation rather than interest. The moment they noticed the attention Hannah was receiving, their expressions changed. Margaret and Richard looked taken aback, whispering to each other, while Daniel's friends shifted uncomfortably. They had assumed she would remain insignificant, someone who could be dismissed at will. Now, they couldn't hide their shock as she commanded the room with ease and authority. Hannah noticed them across the room but didn't let it affect her. She offered a polite nod, subtly acknowledging their presence without giving them the satisfaction of attention. She understood that her power didn't come from humiliating them or responding to their judgment, it came from her own accomplishments and the respect she had earned. Every word she spoke, every confident gesture, and every impressed look from the audience reinforced her quiet triumph. The emotional payoff was undeniable. The same people who had mocked her, belittled her, and doubted her capabilities were now watching her shine. Their whispers and glances confirmed what she had already known, their judgment had been wrong. The contrast between their assumptions and the reality of her success was impossible to ignore, and Hannah felt a quiet satisfaction in seeing it unfold naturally. More than anything, Hannah felt empowered. She no longer measured her worth based on Daniel or his family's opinions. She understood that her value had always been hers to define, and now the world around her was beginning to recognize it too. Her internal growth, confidence, and ability to rise above judgment made the recognition even sweeter. By the end of the event, Hannah felt a sense of completion. She had stepped fully into her own light, demonstrating her leadership and intelligence without relying on anyone else's approval. Daniel's family had been exposed to the reality they had ignored, and Hannah had claimed her space in the world with dignity and strength. She left the event not just celebrated by others, but fully aware of her own power and worth, ready to continue her path without looking back. Hannah realized that the final step in reclaiming her life was making a choice for herself. She knew that staying with Daniel would mean continuing to compromise her self-respect and allowing someone who had failed to support her to remain in control of her happiness. After much reflection, she decided to end the relationship. It wasn't a dramatic scene or a shouting match, it was a quiet, firm decision grounded in clarity and self-worth. She spoke calmly, expressing that she needed a life built on respect, trust, and mutual support, things Daniel had never truly offered. Lucas remained a steady presence in her life, offering guidance and encouragement, but never pushing for more than she was ready to give. He respected her independence and celebrated her achievements without overshadowing them. Their connection deepened not through dependency or romance, but through shared respect and understanding. His support reminded Hannah that meaningful relationships were built on partnership, not control or judgment. Meanwhile, Daniel and his family began to face subtle consequences. Their elitism, manipulation, and dismissive behavior had become visible not just to Hannah, but to those around them. Friends, colleagues, and industry contacts noticed their arrogance and inability to see value beyond their own narrow standards. The same people who once followed their lead now recognized the imbalance and unfairness of their attitudes. Though there were no dramatic punishments, the exposure itself served as a quiet acknowledgement of their faults. Hannah's revenge, in truth, had been simple but powerful. She never needed to confront them directly, yell, or humiliate them in return. Her success, dignity, and self-assurance spoke louder than any words ever could. Each achievement, each recognition she earned, and each step she took forward demonstrated her worth in a way that was undeniable. The truth revealed itself naturally: she was capable, respected, and thriving, while those who had tried to diminish her influence were left to reckon with their own limitations. The emotional impact of her journey was profound. Hannah's triumph wasn't flashy or vengeful, it was quiet, intelligent, and measured. She had endured judgment, betrayal, and humiliation, yet emerged stronger, wiser, and fully aware of her value. She had proven that patience, persistence, and self-respect were far more effective than confrontation or anger. In the end, Hannah felt empowered. She had reclaimed her life on her own terms, with dignity intact. She walked away from toxic relationships, embraced her growth, and allowed her achievements to define her rather than anyone else's opinions. For the audience witnessing her journey, the lesson was clear: true triumph comes from integrity, perseverance, and the courage to rise above those who underestimate or betray you. Hannah's story was not just one of revenge, it was a story of empowerment, quiet strength, and the enduring power of self-respect. Looking back on everything that had happened, Hannah felt a mix of emotions. There was still a trace of hurt from the betrayal she had experienced, but it was overshadowed by pride in how far she had come. She had faced judgment, condescension, and disappointment, yet she had never allowed those experiences to define her. Instead, they had shaped her into a stronger, more confident version of herself. Hannah reflected on what she had learned about self-worth. She realized that her value had never depended on Daniel's approval or his family's acceptance. For too long, she had allowed their opinions to affect her sense of self. Now, she understood that true empowerment came from within, through recognizing her own strengths, trusting her instincts, and refusing to settle for anything less than respect. She had proven to herself that she could rise above negativity and judgment without compromising who she was. The key lesson she carried forward was simple but powerful: sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone, it's showing your value while moving past them. Hannah had chosen the path of patience, hard work, and integrity. By staying true to herself, she had achieved a quiet but undeniable victory. Her life, her success, and her dignity spoke louder than any confrontation or argument ever could. The people who had underestimated her, Daniel, his family, and their circle, were left to reckon with the reality of who she had become. There was still lingering tension in her life, though. Daniel felt regret, realizing too late the mistakes he had made and the love he had taken for granted. His parents, who had once judged and dismissed her, were now confronted with their own arrogance in a subtle but undeniable way. Meanwhile, Lucas's admiration remained, not as a romantic crutch, but as recognition of her courage, intelligence, and perseverance. Hannah saw in him a reflection of the respect and equality she had been seeking all along. As she looked toward the future, Hannah felt free. Free from the expectations of others, free from relationships that had limited her, and free to define her own path. Confidence and empowerment had replaced fear and self-doubt. She no longer worried about pleasing anyone or defending herself unnecessarily. Every decision she made from this point forward would be rooted in her own principles and vision for her life. Hannah's journey left a message for anyone who had faced betrayal or judgment: your strength lies in rising above, improving your worth through action rather than argument. Success, dignity, and self-respect are far more powerful than revenge. By the end of her story, Hannah wasn't just victorious in the eyes of others, she was victorious in her own life. Her story served as an inspiration, showing that no matter the obstacles, staying true to yourself and trusting your value is the ultimate triumph.